Well, we have a quorum of the Select Board. It's Monday, May 19th at 6:30 p.m. and I will call this regular meeting of the Waterbury Select Board to order. Our first item of business is to approve the agenda. The only comment I have is that Tom and I, in our zeal to finalize the agenda, have the traffic ordinance twice. We probably don't need it on consent since we included it as a regular agenda item later. Some folks also mentioned the flood update. I don't know if we want to add that either, but those are the only things I'm aware of.
How many traffic?
I have H reaffirm the thing, but then 8:30 we have traffic ordinance, so we can talk about it.
Okay, so I move to approve the agenda with the item H taken out of the consent agenda and to add a brief update on flood risk this week.
Where we're doing that.
After Vermont State Police. Awesome, because I want to know.
Great. So we had a motion by Tori, a second by Roger. Is there any further discussion on the agenda? Are you okay, Roger? You were making your face. Are you good?
No, I wasn't.
Okay, sounds good. All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, we have an approved agenda for tonight. So next up, we have the consent agenda items. On that is the minutes of our last regular select board meeting on May 5th. A first-class restaurant and bar license and third-class restaurant and bar license and outside consumption permit for Gallus Holding, 92 Stowe Street. A first-class bar license, third-class restaurant bar license, and outside consumption permit for Hen in the Wood at 14 South Main Street. First-class restaurant bar license, third-class license for Pegasus, 23 Main Street. First-class restaurant bar license, third-class bar license, and outside consumption for Propig Brewery. Third-class restaurant/bar license for Country Club of Vermont. And second-class licensed tobacco and tobacco substitute endorsement for R.G. Blake Enterprises Billing Mobile.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Tori, second by Kane. Any further discussion on the consent? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that brings us to public comment. This is an opportunity to comment on anything that is not already on the Warren Select Board agenda. We ask that folks keep their comments under 5 minutes, and if we need more time for something, we're happy to add it to a future Select Board agenda. Is there anyone who would like to speak on public comment? Sandy? Sandy got her hand up. And I will name, I've received some feedback about this, so I'm going to do my best to time on my phone and just let other board members know that if I have stopped paying attention to it, they're allowed to give me a nudge. But my job as chair is to enforce it. And we'll go from there. Thanks,
Mine's going
Sandy.
to be quick. So.
Great.
I just wanted to know if it's possible that the meeting agendas be posted on Front Porch Forum with, all the information, everything. I mean, I've been trying to do it, but if it could be done as a regular thing, I think that's a way to get people to see it. But also, the documents attached, is it possible to change them so that they're all PDF? Because I couldn't open the WordX until I got to work because I couldn't open it. I don't have the format, so. Okay, thanks.
All right. Thank you. I think two very easy things. Nearly 30 seconds. Not that it's a competition. Other folks for public forum. I saw some other hands. Valerie, were you next? Yes. And then we'll go to Chris. Thanks, Chris.
I get yelled at once.
Well, you both had the hands, so.
I know, I think he was ahead of me, but ladies first. Yeah, so my comment is to the board about the local option tax policy, which I think isn't quite a policy yet. I think it's still more of a paragraph within some documents. So my comment is to propose an addition or an edit to add voting procedure. So if the expense for the local option tax isn't a capital expense, or it isn't to mitigate increases in property taxes, that it goes to a public warning where the public can discuss it and perhaps discuss and make some decisions on that. And I think I would also like to read, somebody else sent me similar saying, but different words, to amend the local option tax policy to state Any request for funding by an organization that is outside of town government has to be requested through appropriations and included on a warning for taxpayers to approve. So it's a different verbiage, but the message is similar. So my comment is a proposal to add to a future select board agenda, a discussion to add voting procedure to the local option tax policy.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Raise your hand.
Now I keep going.
Well, now he's just mobile, so I guess Chris is next.
Hi, everybody. This is a couple of comments and questions about a couple of road issues. Now that they've ground Nealon Flats, I was completely surprised that they were down to the gravel on that road, which shocked me that there was only a couple inches of asphalt there before you got into actual bank run gravel. There's some shoulder work being done, but in my opinion, take it for what it's worth. Well, first question is, Tom, how much asphalt is going to get put back there? Do you know if it's the same amount or?
I believe same amount. The last pavement, I believe, was 13 or 14 years ago, which is not terrible for Vermont.
Yeah. Well, one of the underlying problems that I see is in many cases the shoulder's not being taken down far enough to shed water off the road. In order for that to happen, it's impossible in a couple of areas because of the grade that comes up, like in the farmer's field and whatnot. Hindsight, and I know it's a moot point at this point, but maybe we should have, if we'd have known, we could have just ground that and left it there, done a reclaim and paved over that, which would have elevated that whole thing up. Basically, the road, in my opinion, is too low in many places, and that's problematic because then the water doesn't get off the road, it ends up sitting in the road, and that deteriorates the road as time goes on. But to your point, Tom, you're right. I thought it was closer to 10 years ago, but you may be right. It was when I was on the board, so it might have been, as far back as 13 years. And I understand, they took the grindings and put it elsewhere to help out that scenario. So that's a concern of mine, is being able to cut those shoulders down. Right now, she's cutting them down, so basically when it's repaved, it'll be level, and that's, given the fact that we do use sand on that road from time to time, and that's what builds those shoulders up, to take those shoulders down now when she's in the process, to give that material area to build up over time instead of just being level and building up from there. Maybe she could rethink of that a little bit and take those down lower if she can, where she can. The other comment was the Shaw Mansion dip. I don't know if Woody's been in touch with you on that, Tom, at all. Had he talked to you at all on any of that? So earlier in the spring, middle of March, I had to go down through there for a reason, and I noticed that there was a wash about this big around, probably 3 feet deep, right at the head of that culvert. So I texted Woody and let him know about it. I went back through the next day, because we're working up above there, and there was 3 cones there, and the hole was still there. So the following day, I had Jeff throw some material, stay mat in my truck, my little 1-ton, brought the compactor up, and we filled the hole. I told Woody that something needed to be done there because unfortunately in that dip, you got water coming from both sides that converge at the top of that culvert, and you could see what was happening there. And I think they had graded it, so they'd left a little windrow right there, so that directed all the water that dumped right off the end of that culvert and bored a hole. And once that hole got bored, it just got bigger and bigger.
1 minute, Chris.
Yeah, so I told him that of a couple of solutions, either we got to raise that road so that the water, raise it up over the culvert so the water sheds off, further beyond the culvert head, or put a slab there underneath the ground so that when the water goes off, it doesn't chew through the dirt, it hits that slab and goes over the end of the culvert. There's a couple of scenarios there that, and I told them it needed to be taken care of. Well, this last rainstorm, you can now see to the bottom of the culvert. The hole is that big around and goes all the way to the bottom. So, and it's right behind the stone retaining wall. So now you've got a bigger problem to deal with. So I did text him, must be either he didn't work today, he didn't respond to me.
He was here today.
He was, yeah, he probably got a lot on his plate. But
10 seconds.
so now you got a problematic issue that I have to be looked at. So thanks.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Anyone else who would like to speak on public forum for something that isn't on the warned agenda? Online, anyone? Oh, Mike, go ahead.
I just want to briefly thank all the people who participated in the community fair on Saturday. I thought it was reasonably successful. I wish we would have had more people, and I think in hindsight, it probably would be good if we had that community fair earlier in the year versus at this time, because everyone's getting into spring projects and such. But the people were there, all the community. I think I tried to get, they tried to volunteer me for 4 more different things, so I have to avoid stuff like that. But thanks everyone, if you were there. I really appreciate people participating.
And thank you, Roger, for putting it on. Appreciate all the efforts you did on that.
Yep.
It probably will be earlier next year. We just couldn't quite manage it until May this year.
Thanks. Anyone else for public comment? Okay, thanks, Roger. See, now I look at the Orca person, so I'm so sorry, but now I'm gonna call on you because I see your hand going up, and it's not a hand raise. They said they wanted the front of my face. I'm not delighted, but anyway. All right, with that, anyone else for public comment? Last call. All right, next up we have Vermont State Police. I see we have representatives here. Would you mind coming up and saying hello? Thank you so much.
And if I can be sure to have your names for the minutes, please.
Yes, May, M-A-E, Murdoch, M-U-R-D-O-C-K.
Alexis, A-L-E-X-I-S, Marciniak, M-A-R-C-I-N-I-A-K.
Thank you guys for your service.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been on our parking lot waiting list for the agenda for many weeks now, so we're thrilled that schedules worked out and you all were able to be here. It looks like you have some prepared comments. I don't know, or if those are just notes from other things.
Just notes on things that may come up. Is there anything?
I'll turn it over to the board. I know there's been a number of folks with specific questions. Does anyone want to start? Roger's eyes just got really big, but I'm not calling you out. In general, I mean, I would just say in general, it might be useful in general to get an update on how things are going in Waterbury. I think in general, we're hearing supportive comments and some folks saying that they'd like to see a lot more presence and recognize you all are juggling other commitments as well. So maybe just high level how things have been going with regards to the Waterbury troopers.
Historically, with the department as a whole, staffing remains an issue. That is one of the larger problems that allows us to give the time in the town, just because our first obligation is to go back to the barracks if staffing is needed. That can have an impact on our ability to respond as we want to in the timely manner that we want to provide to the community members of Waterbury. With that being said, the Berlin Barracks has received 2 transfers from other barracks. Their current existing troopers, one is Trooper Alexis Marciniak. She has transferred up from the Westminster Barracks. She started this past Sunday?
No, actually tomorrow will be my first shift.
Okay, so tomorrow first shift at the Berlin Barracks. She's gonna be assigned to the night shift Waterbury spot. I'm the day shift right now. We will have another trooper coming for the Berlin Barracks in about a week. And then end of next month, believe it's next month, we'll have 2 new troopers coming from the academy. So within the next couple months, we're expecting to have 4 troopers that will help to alleviate the staffing problem that we have at the Berlin Barracks.
Will you continue to do the day shift for Waterbury?
Yes.
I think one area of concern we heard a lot was just the intersection between Blush Hill and Route 100. A lot of community members are frustrated with how people are blowing lights or speeding through that, and they just feel it's an unsafe intersection. So
Okay.
if you could just,
Yeah,
eye out on that.
community feedback and suggestions like that, that's what helps us, because obviously we can't be everywhere at once, so we rely heavily on community input. It's not an annoyance to us. We need that to be able to direct our response to where it needs to go. And so I'll definitely make note of that and
Thank you.
pass that
I think
along.
it'll probably be a little bit less of a problem with the road closure on Stowe Street Bridge, but for future,
Yeah.
once that project's not happening.
Too congested to speak for 3 months.
Yeah.
Roger?
I think speeding is generally an issue. I've heard about almost every street in the town being it being a concern. I was wondering, how much time are you able to spend patrolling the streets, or just sitting and watching for speeders? And I guess in particular, I was wondering about your capacity to sit on Main Street in front of the firehouse instead of parking behind the firehouse.
Yeah, so that's something that we are trying to implement with parking in front. I've had countless of people walk up to my cruiser because I've started to park out front and just do paperwork and stuff, just so that that's more proactive. Just the public appearance, they see law enforcement there. I think that's something that's really important, and hopefully other troopers do that as well, or will at least start implementing that. As far as how much time that we can provide, that's based on call volume. That's a hard answer to give, but as I had mentioned, the community input of specific areas and specific suggestions, so something like that, if that's what you want to see, or a community member wants to see more, then that's something that we can definitely consider.
And the ones that come to mind are Neelan Flats, which now has been taken care of, with the grading issue. But also Maple Street, Waterbury Center. It's a congested area, but people come down at a certain speed through there, and so I think that would be a place worthy of patrol.
Little River Road, we get a lot of complaints.
Okay.
Even with the big jump.
Yeah.
Well, once you're past the jump,
Smooth sailing.
We need less road maintenance.
the questions I've been fielding are more pointed. One was DUIs, if you have stats on those from Waterbury, and then a big concern about B&Es, about breaking and entering, or businesses that have been broken into.
Yeah. Sorry.
No.
As far as the stats, I didn't come prepared with specific numbers, but I can certainly make that a priority and get them over to Tom and the board with that. And then as far as breaking and entering, I know there are some instances where businesses will report it days later.
Got it.
That definitely hinders the ability to collect like DNA or pertinent information, evidence of a crime. So it's really important to respond, to get that report as soon as possible so that we can respond effectively. Is there a specific, are you talking about like downtown businesses? or?
It was downtown businesses. The DUIs were a concern of regular folks, and then the B&Es were a concern of a few businesses. But I guess I'd also like to echo Roger's sentiment about I've fielded more comments about having law enforcement be front-facing so that people see you guys. And
Okay,
I think
that's fair.
that's going to go a super long way to calm nerves.
Just to clarify, when you say front-facing, do you mean you'd like to see actual foot patrols?
No, just general, as long as
High
you-
visibility
right,
patrols is
yep.
kind of what we call it.
Yeah, yeah. As long as you or your cruiser is sighted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How much of your time, because I know the drug issue was becoming heightened, and I know like the issue on Route 2, some of that seems to have calmed down a bit. Do you see an increase, decrease of drug issues around Waterbury?
It ebbs and flows. Route 2 was an example where it's just such a concentrated
Right.
area. That gets disturbed
Right.
and it just kind of scatters, and then oftentimes it'll start back up in a concentrated area somewhere else, but that takes time for that behavior to get picked back up in one spot.
Do you think, like, I know years ago, I think they had neighborhood watches and stuff like that. Do you think that would be helpful around town?
I would be cautious of that. Obviously, everyone should be observant of their
Right.
surroundings, call 911 whenever they feel like something's up. It's never a bother to call 911 if there's any concern. Trust your gut instinct. Nowadays, you never know what someone else will do.
Yeah.
So I just be cautious with something like that. And that's,
If you see something, say something.
yeah.
Tom, do you have particular questions? I'll name that for the board. Most of our interaction with you all goes through the manager. So curious if you
I
have
have a few. First is the armory. I haven't, since Alden Shelter's been there, I know it's winding down for the summer. I haven't had complaints. I just want to make sure you haven't had complaints either.
I actually have not personally had to respond there.
Okay.
I know from what I've heard, there's been more of fire alarm, smoke alarm type of calls, which could possibly bring law enforcement to respond just as a unified unit. But apart from that, I'm not aware of any significant problems there.
Okay. And then on homelessness, prior years, we had some homeless folks living by the interstate. We've had some folks living in our material storage yard down by the ice center. I have not noticed anyone in those places. I'm just wondering if you're aware of any homeless people in Vermont in Waterbury that are, I know we always have some car campers, but are camping. I just haven't seen it of late. Just wondering if you have any more information than I do.
I do know that there are some people, I don't want to mention locations just for safety reasons. I guess it's good that you don't know. Because that just means that people they're in that spot just to have somewhere to stay and to live. I've interacted with them. I interact with them pretty regularly. And
Okay. And just want to note, I don't know the circumstances, I don't really need to know necessarily, but our camper, the Winnebago that was parked by the interstate is gone.
it is, yes.
And we received quite a few complaints about that, so I'm just glad that it appears to have been resolved.
Yeah, so that, pull-offs like that, there's no signs that say no overnight parking. So that definitely hinders our ability to say, hey, move along. I think that push came from AOT because that's their property, so they had the lawful ability to say, this isn't a good situation for you to be here. I know that did cause a lot of concerns by community members, but there was just nothing at that point for us, the state police, to enforce or to cause to have any sort of conversation with them about living there.
Tom, there used to be there used to be a no camping ordinance in the village. I don't know if that still is on the books for the town.
It is, it's in our parks ordinance,
Mm-hmm. So would that give you any,
but that just applies to our parks, not,
oh, just the parks, okay. All right.
Yeah, so the wording is key.
Mhm.
I would suggest if there is an increase in people camping and concerns, take a look at your verbiage and how your ordinances are worded. Consider signs, because that just gives something for law enforcement to act on. But if that's not there, then we have no ability to make contact with those individuals pertaining to that matter.
I'm curious, outside of staffing, which you've named, is there other things that would be under our control as a board that you feel like are impacting your ability to be as present or impactful in Waterbury as you'd like?
I don't think so. I think it's just staffing. We get pulled, I know, this week, I'm pulled twice to cover into the regular barracks rotation. However, I ask that the Waterbury trooper, when possible, gets assigned the area that still covers Waterbury. So the way our barracks is set up is we're set up in zones or patrol areas, and there's two ways that we can separate those, and obviously Waterbury will fall into one of those areas given whatever way that we're separating it that specific day. So I think when possible it makes sense for the Waterbury trooper to still have the area that covers Waterbury. However, that will pull us to probably 5 or 6 other towns as well.
Other questions, Roger?
When we had the lieutenant in front of us last year, he remarked that one of the major problems were kids being out late, and generally up to no good, and that he didn't have an ordinance to really sink any teeth into having any sort of meaningful interaction with them. I was just wondering if that's still the case.
It is, yes. Summertime, as the temperature gets warmer, my experience last summer, I've only been here in Waterbury spot for about 1.5 years, so this will be my 2nd summer. But from what I've talked to other people that have held this spot historically, when summer months happen, there's an increase in runaways, just delinquency of just messing with like flower pots on the sidewalk, stuff like that.
So like general nefarious behavior?
Yeah. And so it is, historically, I'm expecting an increase in that, but it still happens throughout the year, even in the dead of winter.
And what are you able to do in situations like that?
Call guardians, ask them to take custody of their kid. But apart from that, it's up to the parents to maintain that. Obviously, we do work very close with the state's attorney's office should the situation arise of that possible criminal charges could take place. We work closely with the state's attorney's office on that, just to see what their suggestion is and move forward accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to contact the parents?
Yes.
Other questions from folks? Any other questions?
Quick one, actually. Tom Bloor brought up something about graffiti, and I just wondered if that was he said something about some of them are the same, whether or not there's any way to find out where that's coming from or handling, you know.
Without cameras
Yeah.
or something like that. TV shows make people think that stuff is a lot more possible to kind of identify, using like CSI and stuff like that. That's kind of a stretch of what reality our abilities are. But the best way is just if local businesses are able to take a look at their systems. Home security systems are great, especially the ones that record all the time. I love like Ring doorbells, for example, however, those only record if there's activation to it. So if you have a system that does actually record 24/7, those are definitely the more ideal systems. But apart from that, there's really not much that can go towards finding out who's doing it.
I was talking about like art versus graffiti versus a language of communication.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people call graffiti street art.
Mhm.
That's how people show themselves and how they like to just show what's going on in their mind. So that is something that you do have to tread carefully because, yes, someone's expressing themselves. However, they have to keep in mind that you can't, if it's not your property, you can't do it on someone else's property. But that's just something that society just needs to keep in mind of if someone's just expressing themselves just to express themselves, or if someone has nefarious behavior or what's behind the meaning. So that's just something that kind of, it's a difficult way to tread, but.
Because you were talking about how Route 2 was a location, and there might be another new location coming up for nefarious behavior.
Yeah.
And the language they put on certain things could lead other people to say, oh, this is a safe place to congregate.
Yeah, so there are different things that we can recognize in the graffiti. There are different symbols
Okay.
that organizations can use. I'm not saying that any of those that are currently popping up around Waterbury are showing any of that behavior. That's not what I'm saying. But that is something that has been used, that graffiti or street art has been used to show places like that. But I'm not familiar with any areas around Waterbury that's showing that.
Yeah, first of all, thank you both for your service. We appreciate it. My father was with the state police for about 20 years. He was commissioner, so I have a lot of respect for the work that you do. I know you're all underpaid and you have a lot of responsibility, so thank you. As far as the graffiti goes, I think that the basic point is the public would like to know if you do experience or see some patterns in terms of the artwork, the graffiti that's there. And then the other question has to do with incident reports. Whenever you're called in for something, is that reported, is that public? You know, I know that you can't necessarily disclose who you might have interacted with, but are the incidences themselves reported so that the public can be made aware of them?
Yeah, so any interaction with law enforcement, with the state police, generates an incident report. Those reports, as long as the case is closed, those reports can be requested online if you just search online Vermont State Police Records Request, there'll be a link that you can go to. You have to pay, I think it's like $25, $20 or $25 for the report. But the key is that the case has to be closed, so it won't get disseminated if the case is still active and being actively investigated, just because that could compromise the investigation as a whole. So if you are involved with the case and want the case report, you can either go to that website or contact the investigating trooper and ask if the case is prepared to be requested, and then they say yes or no, and then you can go and request the report online.
Seems like it used to be, we used to see it on the paper. There was just, we had a local paper at the mobile station. I know over in Stokes, the same thing. I don't know if it still is. So that's why I was asking. I didn't know if that was the case. It seems like the public shouldn't have to pay $25 to find out, but that's above the pay grade.
Yeah, much above.
Yeah, exactly.
Any arrest is put into a blog post, though. If you just do Vermont State Police blog post media reports, those do, as long as it's an adult arrest, those will get posted with just like the offender, the victim, unless it's like domestic assault or abuse protection order, the victim's not listed. But apart from that, it'll show the involved parties a brief summary of what happened, and then if there's a court date or if there's bail was requested, just like a summary of that.
And the time that you've been here, and you may have already said this, but what have you been called in the most for? What types of incidents?
So I started on night shift. That was primarily family disturbances. So family fights, going into simple assaults, so non-family relation fights. And then day shift has a lot of like frauds type cases, retail thefts, stuff like that. Yes.
Do you categorize your incidents by category and send them to us? Like so many speeders during the day, or like the incidents, like broadly, not
to the town?
Yes.
Yeah, so when I first started, I had to generate a report, like a monthly report. Now our admin, Sal, does it, and I think she sends it to Tom.
Sales and Sally Dillon.
Yeah, but do you post it on our website, or
On the website, yeah.
it's what?
When we get that together on the website. It's always a lag, real time, obviously.
And we don't know what happens when you're not here.
Thank you. So just to reiterate, mostly for the Zoom, because I know we have folks that think we've had some questions around graffiti, officers reflecting that they're keeping an eye on that in terms of if there's patterns that they're aware of that they haven't seen any yet. And also some questions around the statistics. So just to name again, in the contracts that we have for the coverage from the officers, we do ask for specific reporting. It sounds like that's going to Tom. I know we have posted them historically. I have not seen them recently, but hearing that, making those available to folks is of interest in terms of, and then you also shared way more detail for if folks do want to do a full public records request for $25 for all closed cases, that will come up. And arrests are public on the blog with a couple of specific exemptions. Yeah. Anything else to add in terms of data metrics reporting? I think we're clearly hearing that that's an interest for folks.
If it is a crash, do not request the report from us, contact the DMV.
Great.
A lot of people go straight to us and then we can't, if it's a crash report, DMV handles that.
All right. We have 5 minutes left. Chris, you had one?
Yes, if you don't mind. A couple of questions and a comment. Have you seen movement at the state legislative level that will perhaps assist you in giving your job a little more teeth to maybe slow down this catch and release scenario? From a drug apprehension standpoint, I'm always concerned about growing drug problems and how it's going to impact our community, like it has Burlington and others. I have friends and relatives that work at local businesses here that have been told about several daytime thefts. One gentleman told my boy that he watched a group of what appeared to be family members walk into the True Value and grabbed whatever they wanted and headed right out the door. One guy had a table saw in his hand, and staff just stood there and did nothing because they were told not to do anything. Second question is gun purchases. Do gun purchase forms come through the state police for verification? Like get down at Perils, do they send that form out to the state police to have them verify whether it's a legal form or not when it comes to buying or purchasing a weapon.
I do not know the exact procedure with that.
Okay.
I know that the gun stores, they do have to do their own checks with any purchase of
Background
firearms.
checks, yeah. I didn't know if that went through you guys, through the state police, does it?
It does not.
Okay.
And then we do get some papers. I don't know what the criteria is that we get notified that this person has purchased a firearm, but it's not something that is of practice with every single purchase with us being notified.
I mean, I've owned firearms since I was 11 years old. I've seen an uptick in people that I know purchasing their first weapons. And there's been times when I'd like to say to our legislators, why don't you go for say down here to Perils on any given day and see the impact of your policies. Because what's happening is scaring the hell out of people. Their only alternative is to go buy their own personal weapon to protect themselves because they feel, that because of the police officers' decline in enrollment and whatnot, that protection is not what they would like to see it.
Chris, maybe one more minute. We want to thank the officers for their time.
Okay, so.
As far as your first point, I think it just ebbs and flows. I personally feel more support in my ability within the last year and a half, year or so. But it's like a roller coaster.
Well, I wish you guys all the best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you.
Roger?
Just in conclusion, I'd like to welcome Officer Marciniak and just let you know that we are here to support you in any way that we can. We enjoy having this contract and we want to make it work for everyone. And the last time, again, we spoke a year ago, the officer said, if you see something, say something. And I just wanted to let people know where they should report anything that they see that they think is suspicious or worthy of investigation.
Yeah, so we have 2 ways to report incidents. One, obviously 911.
Yep.
If you're ever in doubt with what number you should call, just go straight to 911. If you feel that you're in danger, you see an act of violence, you see a crime that's actively happening, so shoplifting. If you see it happening right in front of you, just go straight to 911. An example would be you go and check your monthly credit card statement and see 2 weeks ago there was a fraudulent charge, not an emergency. We have a non-emergency number. That is 229-9191. So something like that, that's not an emergency, just call the non-emergency number. It still gets to us, still can get to us just as fast as calling 911. But that's just those 2 ways that you can get in contact with us.
Attorney General's Consumer Protection Program is another good place to report those kind of things.
Yeah, yep, that's another good place. The fraud was just an example of kind of like a non-emergency type thing.
Right.
But yeah, there are so many state resources that if you do call to report a fraud, there's a lot more ways that you can record it and document it even for tracking purposes in other state agencies. But a trooper can definitely go over that if you have to make that call.
Well, thank you again for your service and for
Thank you.
taking the time here tonight with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Next week's stats. Next up, we had our added item, which was just on flood things, awareness, the perennial Waterbury item. I had a couple of personal emails over the weekend just saying I'm watching the river gauges. I don't know if anyone has further updates to provide. It's that time of year. I'll just name again that we do have text mic out on the homepage of the website, so that's our way to get info out on the municipal level. I think Tom and I at least were both on a webinar that gave a little more detail about those models with someone from NOAA, so we'll see if there's a way we can share that more broadly, just some backing around what's the information that goes into all the different forecasts in terms of informing folks on potential action to take or not. I don't know if anyone else has specific things they want to cover. Okay.
I guess I can say, as someone who religiously watches the flood gauge at least 3 times a day, none of the charts over the last couple of weeks gave me cause for concern. I definitely received texts and phone calls when the river hit 417 about, is this going to get worse? And I was like, well, all the data I'm looking at says it's not supposed to be this bad. So, and I, send people to the NOAA website. If it's a long, drawn-out website, but all you have to Google is NOAA and Waterbury, and it'll take you right there. And you can see where the river's at. You can see the next couple of hours, and then if you scroll down, you'll see 3 different charts that are read in different graphs. One's a hydrograph. One's measured in precipitation, and it'll show you sort of a combo of where it thinks the river's going to be in the next 10 days. And today, it looks like everything's going to go down, but hopefully it stops raining.
Tom, anything you want to add?
I guess just that my takeaway from the, was it a NOAA? I believe a NOAA presentation was they feel really confident in their forecasting. When the forecast has us in the danger stage or the action stage, because they feel like, what I took away was under what I want to say normal conditions, so the ground's not saturated. Takes an awful lot of precipitation to cause inundation flooding, as in the Winooski causing the issue, not water coming up the hills and washing out culverts, that sort of thing. And even the water washing out culverts, it's really, really when we're talking about 3 inches or more in a really short amount of time. But my general take on the presentation was, unless there's a region-wide event, tropical storm, that sort of thing, where there's pretty substantial potential variations in the rainfall totals, that they essentially said to sleep a little easier for the action stage events, that they feel like their forecasting is increasingly better related to that stage. But they also were quick to say that when you get to those, when the ground is saturated and you have those higher, the events where it's going to rain for a full day, that the felt like they were saying the odds of their forecast just get it all sort of widens and as to how accurate they are. And of course, we know experience, if we get 4 or 5 inches in a concentrated event, we're going to have washouts and issues, and that's unavoidable. So it was interesting to learn about it. It also was a little unclear to me the future of it all, because it sounds like that federal agency is going to have some reductions made to it. Whether or not that impacts their forecasting ability or the river gauge, I'm not sure, but it doesn't sound like they're going to be overstaffed anytime soon.
Any other, Roger?
Yeah, last Wednesday, I went to the Winooski Watershed Flood Resilience Conference, meeting, and UVM professor Dr. Rebecca Deal gave a presentation about how their forecasting is improving through the use of LiDAR technology and what they call 2D analysis, which is provides a lot more data than they used to have with just 1D analysis, which is what they used during the 2013 study that Roy Schiff did. And Roy Schiff was there also talking about the work that he's doing. One thing that they mentioned was that because of all the individual hydraulic studies they've done, particularly along the Lamoille River, they have a far more comprehensive analysis now, and that they're trying to do the same thing along the Winooski. So the general mood was positive, that they're going to have more analysis and be able to better connect all the different studies to have a more comprehensive assessment of how to expand the floodplains up and down the watershed.
Any other questions or comments for this, Tom?
I was going to save this for manager updates, but since we're on the topic. So state emergency management, through which FEMA funds flow, had a meeting on Wednesday, sort of an all-hands workout of all the grant applications. And to start with, the bad news is we had applied for what was called an advanced assistance grant that was for a little under $170,000, and that was to do the broader Winooski study, hydrology study, including going up Thatcher Brook. That did not score high on their list, and so they emailed me afterwards and said that one's a no-go. The good news is the cornfield is very high on their list. I've now got to submit the full hazard mitigation grant for the cornfield. All the narratives are written. Part of this is now just filling out paperwork and getting it all in, which I will make a priority and get done hopefully this week.
And how much is that, Tom?
The amount we submitted was for about $3.5 million. FEMA would pay for 75% of that.
And the other 25?
The other 25 would be either the town. I'm also hopeful that there's some funding through the having a senior moment, the grant program escapes me, but the funding through clean water funding, because the project would reduce phosphorus in the watershed, help Lake Champlain, and so there's some pretty substantial funds available for that. So I'm hoping that if the FEMA grant is awarded, we can get additional funding sources, reduce the town's cost, but as it stands, there is a grant application submitted with a potential town liability that would be big enough to be a bond vote, I would assume.
Any other general questions or comments on this?
875,000, I just did the math.
Great, and we're doing math on the match. All right, we will move to our other 715 item, which was additional liquor permits and event approvals. For those curious in the behind the scenes of creating an agenda, these were ones where we anticipated either folks recusing themselves or were a little more complicated. The first was a request to cater permit for the Music in the Alley, which is proposed to be in Jack's Alley this year. This is just the liquor catering permit, and the only note here was that this will also require a town event permit, which was not included, but otherwise, someone can make a motion to just approve item A.
I move to approve item A.
Is there a second?
Second amendment.
Okay.
I'm going to amend the approval to be contingent on the application delivery of
The event permit?
what?
The event permit?
The event permit.
And just before we go further, just to lay it out there, does the Rotary or does Revitalize in Waterbury have any interest, financial interest or otherwise, in the Music in the Alleyway series?
Rotary does not.
RW does not have any financial interest in this. We do convene the Jack's Alley Steering Committee, and we have we set up an approval process with the town. The town is also a member of the steering committee, so that process, they've Turn Music has already applied through that process, and the committee approved it.
So that's an instance that sounds like a synergy to me, not a conflict. Nonetheless, I'll leave it to you to decide whether you want to recuse yourself from this or not.
I will recuse myself on this one too.
Okay, so we had a motion by Tori to approve item A, a second and friendly amendment by Kane to make that contingent upon submitting an event permit. Is that good with you? Any further discussion on this? All right, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed and any abstaining? Roger, are you abstaining? Okay. That brings us to item B, which is a one-time occasion liquor permit for Not Quite Independence Day, Waterbury Rotary Club in Rusty Parker Park on May 28th from 1 to 8 p.m. with details as listed. So we would be looking for a motion to approve this from the board, and I guess Tom is prompting discussion on this. Yes, go ahead, Mike.
Just in full disclosure, I do the application for Rotary, so I recuse myself in all things unless people want to ask a question. I'd be glad to answer a question.
I also am recusing myself because Rotary does benefit financially for Rotary Water, for the NQID parade, and I'm outgoing president, and Mike will be incoming president, so we're out.
All right, Roger.
I'll move to approve.
Is there a second? We have a motion by Roger and a second by Kane. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining?
Abstain.
We have both Tori and Mike abstaining on that. All right. And that brings us up to the broader event for approval for NQID Not Quite Independence Day as a whole. I don't know if there's other folks who want to come up who are going to speak on this.
Dan is here if we want to ask questions.
Yeah, do you want to come up?
Sure.
We have a copy of, say, your application. It looks like specifically for the live music. So we'll go through that.
Dan McKibben with the Rotary.
So this looks like this is specifically for the live music portion from 5:39 at the bandstand.
One comment on the last approval is rain date would be Sunday. So all of this, we're trying to, we've had rain 2 years in a row, so we're trying to have a good plan for rain so we have less sweat if we have to make a last minute call. We're obviously hoping to avoid it. We only call a rain date in the event of dangerous weather conditions. Just rain is not going to cause us to change NQID, as many of you know.
Is there any significant difference between this and your regular concert series?
This goes a little bit later, just because it runs right up till dusk when the fireworks starts, and longer. We're going to start as soon as we can after the parade, roughly around 5:30. We announce the awards from the parade at the park and then start the concert.
Other questions? Mike, you noted that you do help prepare these materials. I'm curious if we should authorize a road closure as well as part of this, or you want to just do the music, or how much of the event?
Yeah.
I will name, if folks have been to meetings, I've been high-horsing about an event and streamlining this a little, but naming where we are right now, we have approved liquor. We can approve liquor for a rain date as well at another meeting, but do we want to do for tonight? We have the concert music, road closure, anything else we need?
We'll need the parade.
Well, there's a state V-Trans road closure permit
Okay.
that a member of our club, Teresa Wood, arranges for the state.
And historically, it's been a little bit of a mixed bag about NQID and what permits they've applied for. It's been viewed as a town-sponsored event, and so I'm certain it should have an affirmative nod from the select board to close the road. But given it's a town-sponsored event, there's been some conversation over the years about whether or not they need to apply for a special events permit. Same conversation has been had about the Festival of Lights. But there is time, so I would think I can work with Dan on the special events permit and have that on the agenda in a couple weeks. It's not a heavy lift, I think, because it doesn't sound like you're changing anything about the event.
No. Obviously, we have the same concerns about traffic, a little bit exacerbated this year with the bridge reconstructions.
Yeah.
I will say, according to our ordinance that we're about to adopt this meeting, possibly, we will need a parade permit, so.
So for this, we'd be looking to approve the entertainment permit for the music. Is there a motion in that regard? Or other questions, Roger?
I think I move to, Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, are we not tacking on that parade? Might as well kill two birds with one stone.
I was fine with that too. Tom was proposing to do it at a later meeting.
It's up to you.
Up to us.
I'm not.
And
Yeah.
just in full disclosure, you know, Rotary has a pretty comprehensive road closure procedure that we follow every year, so it's basically going to be the same, with a little exception, because with the bridge, you know, issues, it may be a little bit, but not much.
Okay. Roger, you made the last motion on the liquor, I think, so we're looking again
Oh,
at
okay.
this entertainment permit for
Yeah.
June 28th, rain date June 29th.
Mhm. And this is for the concert. I'll move to approve the application.
Second.
Motion by Roger, second by Kane. Any further discussion? All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, Tori and Mike abstaining. You are all set for this, the entertainment permit, and it sounds like, Tom, you'll follow up and we can approve the,
Special event permit.
special event as a meeting. But all set with that. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming in. Last but not least, on our special event parade, we have the special events permit for Waterbury Arts Fest.
I move to approve the special events permit for Waterbury Arts Fest.
Second.
Motion by Tori, second by Kane. Is there any further discussion?
I'm going to abstain on this one, but we have the RW president, Lindsay Sullivan, here if anyone has questions for her.
Thanks, Kane. Does anyone have any questions? We have the event being Friday, July 11th and Saturday, July 12th. Any discussion? Any other questions on this? All right. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Approved with Roger abstaining. We are all set for Arts Fest. Thank you all. Thanks for coming in. Next on the agenda, we have town board and commission appointments. First up is update on residency requirement. At a prior meeting, someone asked a comment regarding is residency required. I answered at that meeting that I didn't think so, that in practice we've had folks. Since that meeting, we've been informed of the state statutes around conservation commissions in particular, which does require residency. So that is going to require us to change some of the folks we have previously appointed, and we'll have openings again. So update for the public, because that was a change from what has been said publicly for that particular board. Certainly folks, anyone's welcome to attend a meeting and participate, but in terms of voting quorum, the guidance is that it needs to be all residents.
Is it only for that board?
That was the statute that was shared with me. I have not researched beyond that. I don't know.
We don't have that issue in other boards.
Okay. Good to know.
Is that the DRB?
DRB is all residents.
Yeah, and it was out of the committee you were referring to, I guess.
Oh, no, sorry. Conservation Commission is the one where it was brought to my attention. So that's just an informational update. And then we have an application from Anita for the tree board. She had been served previously and is interested in being reappointed.
I move to reappoint her.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? I'm trying to just find the term. It looks like we have both the 3-year and a 2-year term on the tree board still available.
Oh, I move to appoint her to a 3-year term.
Second.
Motion by Tori, second by Kane. Any further discussion?
Is she available to?
I don't know if she's here
She had to choose
tonight. I
whether
don't
she
see
wants to
her.
serve her 2 or 3 years.
Don't show up to get
I will say
bumped.
I did attend the last tree board meeting, and she was surprised that her appointment had already ended and was happy to continue serving, so.
Sounds like 3 years, huh?
Yeah, another 3 years.
Sounds good. And we do have our written application from her. I don't know if Tom printed it, but it's posted. All right, motion by Tori, second by Kane. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, we'll continue on the tree board. All right, next up we have review and adopt ethics complaint procedure, and I will turn it over to Tom.
If I have in the packet, the draft, the municipal complaint form. I do see just want to put out, I know there's a typo on the top of page 2. This is what happens when you get PDFs late at night. Couple issues about the form to bring to your attention. The first of importance, which you can change, is on page 1, towards the top. Anonymous complaints are not accepted, which is my recommendation to you, but you can certainly change that. The rest of it is I think what I discussed the other week, which is the form in a number of ways requests as much specificity as possible. I think it's important that someone understand the code of ethics and the town policy, the town conflict of interest policy, and make a specific allegation about a section of the code or the policy that was violated. And there's also opportunity to attach whatever you want to any complaint. The other piece I want to point out related to this, there's also the ethics investigation and enforcement ordinance, which is part of the packet. And that talks about enforcement against elected officials, but essentially you are your own enforcement. There's no process in Vermont to unelected official, if you will. And so really the bottom of page 2 of that, top of page 3 talks about appointment, enforcement against elected officials and appointed officials. I think that sums it up.
So do we need
I had
sorry,
just to say, just had a Vermont town and city managers meeting last week, and I raised this topic, and a number of people chimed in and said that, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns full up the municipal code of ethics for a number of years for a couple reasons. One is that it didn't include state elected officials. The other is that VLCT always opposed the conflict of interest definition because it had the appearance of a conflict, which is, I think, a little bit wishy-washy when it comes to a law. But other municipal folks in that meeting said to me, yeah, that they're seeing increased ethics complaints, and there's a sentiment that the state ethics laws is being used at times to make the lives difficult for good people. And that's a shame, but that's exactly what the LCP said would happen. And I think we're experiencing that around the state. End of rant.
Do we need a separate motion for the complaint form and another one for the enforcement ordinance? Do you have 2 separate ones?
So the complaint form is in draft form. You would need a separate motion for that. I wanted to wait, and assuming people were okay with the investigation enforcement ordinance, I wanted to just warn that separately at a meeting, because it is an ordinance. It would need to be a separate item, and then I'd publish it in the Times Argus to go through the legal process. But didn't want to do that here, because what the law says is that if you essentially, if a draft ordinance is in the meeting packet and there's any form of substantial amendment, which is, I think, a matter of opinion, you essentially have to rewarn it. So I wanted to hopefully go through it, get final consensus, warn it next time, and hopefully then have it formally adopted and be done with.
In the interim, can we adopt the complaint form?
You can 100% adopt the complaint form.
All right. I move to adopt the complaint form
The
with...
public make comments on that?
Kane is just making a motion. There's time for discussion and allow public comment. Mike also had his hand up, so go ahead, Kane.
I move to adopt the draft municipal complaint form including anonymous complaints are not accepted, and the change of the typo.
What, can we specify the type?
Page 2, Waterbury. And item 3.
Okay, and I will name in for what? Name, job title, or position and municipality. I mean, do we want them to say Waterbury again, or is that to refer to EFUD? I was just confused why that's that. One.
Where is that?
Who is complaint, name, job title, or position and municipality?
I think sometimes people are confused.
In, okay.
And they might not know whose town, who's EFUD. So I think having that there makes sense. We can always direct it to the right place.
Right, should we just say Waterbury or EFUD? I mean, we don't have jurisdiction over other municipalities. This is our specific complaint form.
Sure.
I mean, it's fine, I'm fine with the draft language, but, so Kane has made a motion to approve this complaint form, correcting the spelling of Town of Waterbury. Roger?
I'll second it.
Okay, discussion, Mike, I know you had your hand up.
Mine was more on the code of ethics investigation and enforcement, or I know we're just dealing with the form.
Great, so on the complaint form, we have a motion and a second. Did I have a public comment? Sandy?
Number 3 and 4 really kind of seems repetitious.
Except for the spelling.
So I think you're right to some extent, but I think 3 is really, in my mind, requesting a little bit more of a narrative. And 4 is really chapter and verse, we're alleging violation of section 4.2.
Well, the first comment, the first sentence almost looks like the same.
But I think it's good to reinforce specificity, and I think having them essentially write it in a similar manner twice is helpful for that.
And the other thing I wondered is, because it says that it has to be hand-signed, my question would be, can this be made into a fillable form on the website and the ability to be signed? Because not everybody has a printer. And sending things in the mail even, I don't know about your mail, but mine's not great. And somebody being able to have the time to get down here or something, it would just be nice to allow an e-signature because that is, it all traces back to the email that you're, so, people use legal documents all the time with these signatures.
I have no objection if you wanted to just make a signature line and not say it must be hand-signed.
Yeah, I have no objection to that. I also think it might encourage people, and a fillable PDF could be nice if we could do that, just because I think it'll be easier to read typed print than handwriting.
Kane, you made the motion.
I have no objection.
Okay. Roger, you seconded. Is that all?
Yeah, no, I accept the friendly amendment.
Other questions or comments on this? Lisa?
Yeah, I think, I'll stand here. I think generally speaking, when I read this, my concern is that it feels like the onus is being put on the citizens to act as if they have some sort of legal standing. This is not a legal matter, and yet it's written, the form is written as if it is a legal matter.
Well, it is a legal matter because this includes the Municipal Code of Ethics is state law. So you're alleging a violation of the law.
Correct, but when we're talking about ethics, you're not always breaking a law, right? So
Well,
somebody isn't always breaking a law. And let me just finish.
But-
My point in stating this is that the idea should be to encourage people to pay attention to what their public officials are doing and not be discouraged from filing a complaint because they don't feel they have the legalese, they don't have the legal know-how to do that. And I think that we need to act in such a way that we are encouraging it and not discouraging it. And I read it through, and I'm fairly well educated, and I think it's not an easy thing to do to have to make a legal case for why they think they should be bringing something to the attention of whoever it is that is going to be reading this. That's my point. So do with it what you will, But I do think that's important, and I think it's important that we not discriminate against people who don't have the kind of education that might make it easy enough for them to read a bunch of legalese jargon that much of our laws are made up of. That's all. So.
Thanks. Other discussion or comments? All right, we have Mike.
Just in regards to Lisa's comment, I know I, for one, would be glad to help any individual, you know, and I'm sure a lot of others on the select board would as well, because I hear what you're saying, because sometimes people think there's a wrong, but they don't know how to put it together. It's just like going to the IRS and getting the IRS help, which is that's probably a bad example, because that's a tough one to get through. But I think there should be ways to assist people filling out that form, and I have no problem with that happening.
And I appreciate that. I think that, again, if they're complaining about somebody on the board, they don't necessarily want to go to somebody on the board to ask for the help.
There are other people that can
Sure.
give them assistance.
Sure.
Someone on staff,
Sure.
you know, there are.
Again, we want to make it easy as possible, not make it more difficult. The whole process is intimidating,
Yep.
so.
The kiss prints.
Any other discussion on this?
Just a quick question. Listen, would that, maybe you can answer this, Tom, would that be overstep on the select board part to assist somebody with that?
I don't see why.
Okay.
And obviously, I think it would be if it's complaining against someone else on the select board. I think there's obviously an issue there, but, and again, I don't think we don't require people to be attorneys to fill this out. We just ask for specificity. And I think that means you've got to describe what you think wasn't ethical that occurred, but I think you also need to take, and you should take some time and energy to know the law. And I think people should make that effort, because behavior you may not like doesn't mean it's unethical. And I think, you know, there's a formally adopted town policy, there's a formal state law, so I think it's a useful exercise for someone to fill this out and to also try to look at those. Maybe they can't do it, but to try to look at those and say what portions the individual was in violation of. And if they can't do that, that's okay. They can then just write the incident. It doesn't say we will not investigate if you're not specific about the exact section of law.
Then it might be nice to add something like that so that people understand. And I only bring this up because somebody contacted me that felt they didn't understand how to do it. And so, but if there's some comment like you just suggested, that might be helpful on there too. If you aren't sure, because I agree, people should be familiar with it. I'm just saying some people aren't. Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion on this? And again, this is a complaint form. This is one and certainly not the only way to register anyone's feelings about the conduct of the select board. As I'll say, certainly over my time here, we have public comment every meeting, so folks are welcome to submit this form or not and provide us feedback a variety of other ways as well.
Just a couple other quick things. So
Yeah.
in the state law, it refers to other officials that ethics complaints can be made to, State Ethics Commission, Vermont State Auditor, the state police, the list goes on. But just one other note. On the State Ethics Commission website, there is a notice that went up pretty recently. I was made aware of it Thursday, that says the State Ethics Commission will no longer handle municipal complaints. They won't assist us with an investigation because they have 2 part-time employees, and since the new law went into a place that hasn't changed, so it made sense that cities and towns were going to them for advice, but they're overwhelmed.
Right, we had a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so that's the municipal complaint form that we have. We then also have the investigation and enforcement ordinance. Mike, you had a comment on this?
Yep. I just have a question under D. Who in our municipality is not subject to those items? to me, all staff, I can't see why they wouldn't be subject to potential ethics.
They're all subject to town policy, but the state law limits it to their definition of municipal officers, and I've mirrored that here. So a librarian necessarily wouldn't have the authority to, may not, I think the intent was to understand that certain people just are not in decision-making positions of real significance.
So is every one of our commissions subject to this? Because they kind of list the select board, the planning commission, but the cemetery commission, but no others.
Yep, it's what's listed here.
It includes quasi-judicial bodies, so
Yes,
that's
so
like
that's
the
in
Development
DRB.
Review Board. There are other things that are not
Yeah,
named
yeah.
explicitly, but exist in this town.
Yeah.
And then public body.
Mike, is it your pleasure to add the other commissions and
Maybe there's-
boards?
Well, quasi-judicial would cover the DRB, but I think some of the other boards are not covered by that listing, and they're relatively specific. It says department heads, listers.
Melissa, you're right.
Yeah,
Covers the rest of it.
also, if I may, that is just the definition section of what they consider a municipal officer or
Right.
officer. Under section 4A, I think that might be more clearly what you're looking for.
Under which section?
Section
For
4A,
any
including any person elected, appointed, or
or
employed by the town.
employed by the town.
So that would cover the employees,
The other
the
employees.
commissions, the boards that are all appointed members, all of that, so.
Okay. We can live with that. I just, to me, we're almost saying everyone. I know you want to have some specificity, and which I think is good when it comes to matter of ethics. But I think anyone who works or serves this municipality and has some ethical issues, and people have a question about it, should be, you have to stand for what you espouse.
Other questions or comments? So again, Tom's noting that we would need to warn this for our June 2nd meeting because it's an ordinance and then it becomes effective 60 days after. I would respectfully request that we get it to 3 pages by putting the signature lines in 2 columns, just for ease.
Do we need a
Get rid of the
motion to
lines.
That would just be on the agenda for the next meeting. I just didn't want to do that, understanding there could be edits. Just one other piece. I'm still by default so I'm the ethics liaison to the State Ethics Commission. I can wear that hat indefinitely. I don't see any challenge there because that's really an informational interaction. I remain the designated complaint recipient. I'd like to formally advertise for someone to take on that role. So I think it's not really appropriate for that to be me.
I would agree.
And I'm happy to just put that on the front porch forum if Facebook, if people are okay with that, but it's got to be, in the end, that's your appointment.
I mean, I assume they'd be paid.
I don't know. I would think an appropriate model would be you get paid to, on an hourly basis when these complaints come in.
I'm not opposed to hiring anybody else. I just, before you advertise on the front porch forum, if you could come to us with how they get paid and expected hours or whatever, that'd be helpful.
Okay.
I also will return to a pitch that I threw out here when we first started talking about this, that complaints having to do with the select board go to EFUD and complaints having to do with EFUD come to us.
problem.
I think it works.
You might want to see if EFED's up
I
for
know,
that.
that's, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, in theory, one could hold an office in both municipalities, but it's not possible. Tom, I'm curious about like a stipend model, like our public health officer is perhaps one that frequently has no work, but we offer a very modest honorarium throughout the year, and I think additional pay if they receive calls. I wonder if that model is one that might be transferable.
I think so. I think in this case, the person's likely to have some work.
And what would that make you be inclined to do or not do?
And I think I think it requires, not a legal review necessarily, but the person who's a designated complaint recipient is going to have, the ability to understand the law and write pretty complex responses here. So I don't think you're getting away with a low hourly rate here for someone. I don't know what it might be offhand, but we might have a community volunteer who'd be interested, but I suspect people are going to want to do this for a fairly professional rate.
Other questions, Mike?
I agree with your statement, Melissa. I think we're on a slippery slope paying every board person and stuff for, I think there are still people who will volunteer for things. And I like the model that you do have a volunteer, and when it comes to, yes, if you have a complex matter, that's where you pay them pay them some sort of stipend on a per case basis versus just have a stipend at the beginning of the year, a stipend plus. Because if there's no cases, I don't think we should be paying someone a stipend for, or if there's maybe things that could be adjudicated very easily.
Other questions or comments? Again, we're looking for guidance for Tom, both about this specific ordinance and then Sandy and then Lisa.
So have you gotten a lot of complaints, either verbally or in itself, or are you just talking in general, all the other towns said they're getting a lot? Because people haven't had a lot.
I've had several complaints. The challenge with these complaints is, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, they're pretty serious matters, and even if you were to read a complaint and your gut reaction were to be that this is not a real complaint, you still have to respond in a professional manner. And I think it's incumbent on the person responding to explain why it wouldn't be a violation, and to do it in layman's terms, but also to cite the chapter and verse of the law.
Right.
So I think it takes a pretty good amount of time and energy. I would argue that even a relatively small complaint is probably 3 hours of response time going through it, and I think a complaint with any complexity might also require the town attorney to review a final draft. And so I think.
I guess my question is, you have the ability to get legal advice from VLCT for, it doesn't cost anything, so running something through them is a heck of a lot cheaper than, it's just time of doing it. And can you honestly say you've had like 10 in the last year, or?
No, but I can tell you I've probably had, in the last few months, a week's worth of work complaints.
So why can't we try that for a while rather than hiring yet another person?
So VLCT does, for people non-resident towns, we pay our dues, we get access to free legal resources through them. They're really good at helping with things that are procedural. For instance, when we adopt their town charter, there's specificity as to voting and dates, and you've got to live within the exact confines of that law, or you start over. And they're really good at saying, yep, here's your game plan, this works, or no, this date is wrong, fix it. My experience with the OCT, and I think the executive director would echo this, is that when it comes to more complex legal advice, their gut instinct is, not their gut instinct, they tend to give the most conservative answers possible and caveat everyone by saying, you should go to the town attorney. And so I don't think on a complex case is not the right word. I think sometimes the challenge with an ethics complaint or a conflict of interest complaint is that the world isn't black and white, and so you've got to just take some time to think through the complaint and think through the response. And there's a response that's legal, but there's a response where you're also just trying to have a dialogue with a resident of the town and explain the issue and explain the law, and that just takes time. And so that's not necessarily an attorney writing that. It just might be a legal review as part of it. And I just think the LCT is just not very well equipped for that. That being said, I tend to do a fair amount of time on quasi-legal things because attorneys are expensive, and I'd rather draft it myself and have them fix it where necessary rather than have them do it for $250 an hour.
Yeah, you're kind of saying it needs to be an expensive, we're gonna have to hire somebody that's expensive. Well, if that's the case and you can't weed it out like you must have done with the last 4 that you've had, I mean, I know one that I can think of in particular that got brushed under, but so why do you feel now that we have to hire somebody that either you can't handle, or if it is something that seems enough that you can't handle it, then why can't you talk to the attorney? If you're gonna spend the money anyways.
Well, first off, I would vehemently object to any suggestion that I brushed under an ethics complaint. Secondly, it's not that I can't handle it, but it's not appropriate for me to handle it, I don't think. I think the majority of ethics complaints are going to be directed at the governing body or their appointees or myself. And so that puts me in an inherent conflict. If a complaint is made against the governing body, it may not even be appropriate for me to know about that complaint. It may be, but maybe that I should have said, hey, Roger, you might have wanted to think about recusing yourself. But I work directly for the governing body. I certainly cannot investigate them. And so I think it's just a matter of finding the appropriate individual who doesn't have that direct connection. In the end, yes, any person is appointed by the governing body, but being appointed as their full-time manager is different than being appointed as their complaint response recipient.
Yeah, sorry, I gotta leave early. I apologize. Lisa, you have anything?
I appreciate, Tom, what you just said, because I do think it puts you in a really awkward position. And so I go back to the idea, and when this came up months ago, of putting out an ad out there and trying to find someone to volunteer. I've done some research about this particular subject, and there are a number of towns that find people who will volunteer. I've mentioned before, if you've been in HR, you've got a really good feel for what ethics are all about and how complicated it is, and it is extremely complicated. But rather than looking to pay somebody at this point, I think we need to try quite hard to find somebody who would volunteer to do it, and or to find a couple of individuals and create a small board where they can sort of act, be a sounding board to each other in discussing these issues. But I would agree that, I just really feel like I don't want us to turn into, let's get another attorney. That doesn't always work for us. I think we've seen that recently. Oh, and by the way, the law is rarely black and white. I've learned also. Way too much gray.
That's part of the challenge.
I know.
They do that up
And the nuances, absolutely.
Roger.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Lisa. I'm wondering if we could draft a job description.
Would it work for the board if I'll draft a job description and pay structure and work with Alyssa on that? Maybe we could get it out before the next meeting, if you'd be comfortable with that as a board?
Sure.
I have no objection.
I also, you know, if there are people interested in working on this without an inordinate amount of money being transferred, that might be the more preferable first option. Just a thought.
Quick comment, Melissa?
Yep, go ahead.
So is it safe to say, in all fairness, Tom, that your concern is that to prevent any undue damage, unnecessary damage to either party through this process? Sounds to me like that's the ultimate goal.
I think I'm concerned about people serving in volunteer positions for the town and feeling like maybe they're subject to, they're scared of being accused of something. And you know, you have volunteers that have been in town committees for a long time, and they put their heart and soul into this sometimes. And I think this raises a certain level of concern for them. Like I said earlier, I've heard this from other people, and I've experienced this a little bit, that sometimes this can be used as a tool for bad as much as good. So I don't want to discourage people from serving for the town, because we rely on volunteers. The greatest way to have your taxes raised is to not find volunteers to do things. But I think also any complaint also deserves a really good, candid, professional response, and so finding that balance is what I'm trying to do.
Mike?
I think as Lisa said, and I think Roger kind of echoed that, is that maybe we should try to find volunteers first. And I'm not saying we can't, where you have very complex things, supplement that with either the town attorney, but our town is very good with volunteers, as we saw at the community fair. And I think, to me, I think there are some very capable people, as Lisa said, someone involved in HR could probably do this job fairly easily. And when you get to more complex, yes, maybe there could be some sort of a stipend, but I don't want to go right off to a stipend paid, because that's just going to set the bar that everything is going to be stipend paid, and there goes our tax rates.
Okay, so in terms of next steps for this, we have till 8:10 on this, Code of Ethics, Investigation and Enforcement Ordinance itself. Do we have any other comments before Tom can warn this for next meeting in terms of the content in this? I will also just name whatever happens, I'll just say Section 5 enforcement is whoever this human is. If we pay them $1 million or $0, they're going to do a thorough and professional complaint, and it's going to come right back to us on the select board to do a whole variety of things, like talk about it in a meeting, admonish them, ask them to resign. We can't actually require them to resign, so just to land the context of this. Is there any other notes from board members or other around the Code of Ethics, Investigation and Enforcement Ordinance? I'm hearing we're comfortable with it. We'd love it to stay on 3 pages. Tom's going to warn it for the next meeting. Around pay, we've had a couple of different proposals around paying people, not paying people, doing some sort of combination stipend. Tom, you said you wanted to come up with a position description and potential pay scale.
Yeah.
I'll note that what I'm hearing in the meeting, you said you wanted to do that with me, is not necessarily support for paying it, so for now, potentially advertising it. Does that seem workable? Any other questions or comments on this one?
I'm sorry, to be clear, so we're going to first try a volunteer? Is that correct?
Yes, that's what I said.
Okay.
I just heard.
I just want to make
Yeah.
sure.
Yep. Other questions? All right. Next up, we have a debrief from our last meeting. We had 30 minutes of open discussion for folks around Stanley and Watson and potential development, and hearing a variety of comments, and we have 10 minutes on our agenda for if board members wanted to reflect back any high points from that, as well as talk about next steps or additional engagement. Anyone want to start? Roger?
No, I thought it was great to get this out on the table. I know that there have been some, there's definitely interest and maybe some concern on the part of residents, particularly in the Park Row, Randall Street area, about what's going to happen. I think people brought up some good questions about building in a floodplain, and also the possibility of putting in like very small starter homes as opposed to a large multifamily single building. So, you know, I thought it was a good forum to get some new ideas on the table.
Other comments from board members? Okay.
I would just like to reflect that I'm happy that we're at a point where we've started publicly talking about what we're going to do with the space. I like that no matter if someone was talking about tiny starter homes or an apartment complex, everyone's talking about housing on the site, which is great.
Other reflections?
Agree with both Roger and Kane's statements.
I'll say selfishly, I mean, I put this on the agenda because I felt like we got a lot of input and it wasn't necessarily all the same input, so I'm curious about next steps. I will say some major themes I think important to acknowledge, like Roger said, that some folks just have reservations about any development at that site because of the floodplain, so just naming that. I heard some support for single-family homes and home ownership opportunities. I heard some proposals around senior housing, noting that we don't have other places for that, but I'll just name like, that's a lot of very different things. So thinking about kind of our next steps, I'm curious about how just noting that we're not going to be able to do all of the things in one particular location, and yeah, I don't know if there's a way to resolve that. I don't think there is, but I wanted to make sure that we all are aware of what's going on and think about how we're continuing to get input and refine ideas. I will say Joe Camerata from the Housing Task Force talked about how that group might be useful. One of his proposals was around affordability, which I thought was interesting. He's done a lot of work with data around like average median income in Waterbury and what folks might be able to afford for a home or rent and the like. He's going to be at our meeting next week for some other items, but I was curious about, you know, do we as a board think there's a useful task around getting some information about current housing stock in Waterbury or affordability or any of that to have at our disposal as we move forward? Mike?
I think having a component of affordability is good, but I don't necessarily believe that any project there has to be totally affordable. Sometimes the best housing projects are done on mixed income projects. So I don't, as much as I'm very pro affordable housing, but you may want to have some more market rate, whether it be single family, multifamily, et cetera. I think we could benefit. There are people here that are not making $300,000 a year that still need housing, but they may be above 80. You know, it depends upon where you put the bar at affordable housing. Some people do 80% of median. Some people have 110 or 120% of median. Those numbers are, I think, pretty reasonable to get affordability. Then where do you go if you want to have a percent above that? You know, I think that's going to become more attractive to any developer if you have a developer for a whole project, or if you go, you know, depends upon if you do a single family, are you going to do it on a lot by lot basis? So
totally. And just to be clear, there's like a lot of meanings of the word affordable, and I literally just meant data on like what people in Waterbury make and what amount of money they might have to purchase a home based on that. Not saying anything about subsidized at all, but appreciate your points. Kane and then Roger.
To answer your question, yes, I think his voice would be helpful at this conversation.
yes.
I'll echo that and say, specifically, I think it'd be helpful to get his assessment on the feasibility of a couple of things that were mentioned. One might be just like, can there be any building in the floodplain? And then another would be, what is the real feasibility of doing small starter homes within that property? And
Yeah.
what are the pluses and minuses of doing that versus building a larger multi-family housing unit?
There was a design charrette I participated in a couple of weeks back. Matt King and Alan got a little bit of funding for it, and we joined, and I was there with Mike Dacey, and so there was, a group of 10 or 12 people just thinking about options for the site, all of which have some chops in construction or architecture or design, and the suggestion I took back from the meeting was single-family homes in the floodplain, not likely to happen. You can build in a floodplain, but building single-family homes, just the economies of scale, you've still got the floodplain insurance issues. They talked about you've got to raise the site or build a building on pillars, and they talked about, well, maybe you can raise the site with existing fill and have covered parking where, you obviously if it floods, you've got to have vehicles moved out. But they talked about that as an interesting concept. But the sentiment I got from the room too was 2.4 acres of buildable land that's flat, free of environmental issues, and on municipal water and sewer is rare, floodplain or not. So this is your opportunity for density.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have a whole lot of those, Waterbury or elsewhere.
And I guess one potential would be to be building condos, which can be a starter home, right?
Yeah. So I'm hearing a proposal. Do you want to go ahead, Mike?
Yeah, and the one thing, when you go to affordability, because affordable numbers are usually done based upon county-wide median incomes. And I think Waterbury has a very skewed, median income compared to the rest of Washington County. There are some other municipalities within the county that are probably similar to us, but there are others that are significantly lower. So I don't know if there's some way to have a study where we could look at what is median income within our municipality. And that would really help guide what we're looking at for affordability.
And I think Joe already has that.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing, and again, Joe does read the minutes, so I'm, for clarity, trying to say that I'm hearing interest from the select board around asking the housing task force to look at some specific things around Stanley Wasson, generally affordability or income in Waterbury, noting some specificity around Waterbury specifically as compared to the county and surrounding counties. Then I also heard interest in looking at some of the specific proposals that we heard at the meeting and potential viability. So generally on floodplain development for single-family homes, and for larger multifamily. I'll throw in senior housing as another one that came up that I think is intriguing. Any other things? All right, so it feels like some next steps to have that group do a little deeper dive on some of the specific things we heard and came back with some more info. Any other questions or comments on this?
We have a few people that in that
sorry.
meeting may have ideas.
Chris?
Sitting here listening to the discussion, one big concern, and you know it well, and I've said it 100 million times, want to remove any part of confusion about affordable housing. Subsidized housing is not affordable housing. Depending on what portion of that housing project is subsidized, I think there's a bigger tolerance for maybe some subsidized revenue source in the upfront of the project. But subsidization in perpetuity is hard to accept for a lot of people, because somebody's paying that bill. And the concern is just continual pressure on taxes, in whatever form that the state decides to come up with, to continue propelling these types of projects forward. Harry Shepherd talked about the cost of these units down here. Far from affordable. So I think that just needs to be kept in mind moving forward. One of the biggest sticklers is building it in a floodplain. It's not as prone to flooding as per se Randall Street is, but
Pretty close.
pretty close. And as I've said before, we haven't seen the worst of these types of rainstorms that we continue to have to deal with. So that's a big concern of mine, is getting ourselves involved in, and I don't know that it's ourselves that are going to be involved in this. It's, you know, I guess it depends on what you as a group and town manager decides to do. I don't believe there's anything in the Constitution that requires government to provide housing in the state of Vermont. The Vermont State Constitution, I don't believe, says anything about providing housing for its citizens. It lays the framework, like the United States Constitution, to, you know, to allow you to then move forward with your own efforts to provide that. Not that I don't have empathy for some of those people that perhaps can't afford housing. Everybody deserves housing. As I've said before, to supply housing for the sake of shoving other people out just doesn't, the logic's not there.
Thanks, Chris. All right, I'm going to move us on because we're over time. So we are at follow-up discussion on town meeting format and next steps. I think, Roger, you requested this last time as a follow-up after town meeting. I know one of the items was that I had spoken with Susan Clark, who's the moderator in the town of Middlesex. She has offered to come do a presentation on work she's done with other communities, if that was of interest. So that was one item for discussion today. She received grant funding and worked with two, I believe, much smaller municipalities, I think Peacham and Craftsbury, who are both in the Northeast Kingdom. She has kind of a framework around engagement. So quantity of engagement and quality of democratic participation at town meeting, and kind of talks about how different formats create more or less. Those communities both had, again, kind of like months-long study committees that were involved in part of that work. So that's the high-level update, but she is close by and very much willing to be a resource if that's something you'd like to follow up. Mike and then Roger.
Is she, what I'm hearing what you're saying, it sounds like she looks at municipalities that have in-person meetings and how to engage people better.
Yeah, I think I should also say, like, she wrote a book on town meeting. I believe it's called Slow Democracy. So, you know, she's just like an experienced practitioner in this, and I think she consults with all sorts of towns. So yes, those both that I mentioned have in-person town meetings.
I think everyone in this room wants to see increased engagement at town meeting, and how to do it is still a mystery. I guess I'm still not a big believer in, you know, Australian ballot. I don't think it creates a better democracy.
Roger?
Well, I think we did have a lot of engagement at our last town meeting, and it was mostly because we brought this issue up.
Right.
So I think that was effective. We did spend some time on it, but in essence, we were only proposing one change, which was, do we want to move the decision on the budget to Australian ballot? And there may be other ways of creating sort of more hybrid scenarios that we can get more people engaged. I think we certainly felt the quality of the discussion at the last town meeting, but I still think, and people brought this to the fore, that there were a number of people that were unable to come, and so it's my interest is how do we get those people further engaged, or is that where the trade-off is and can't happen? So I second the idea of bringing her here and seeing if she has some other models that have been considered that might fit what people were asking for.
To the effect of hybrid, I will say one thing. One, she's on there's a statewide study committee. I'm going to get the act number wrong, but that is looking at a number of these things. She's a designee and they're doing work. And I think Jericho was looking at actually changing state law to potentially allow some sort of like in-person meeting and vote combo, which is not currently allowable. So again, maybe she'll be able to share other examples too. Other questions or comments on this? In general, I'm hearing like folks think it would be worthwhile to hear from Susan directly as opposed to my sleep-deprived recounting of a several month ago meeting and full disclosure. Tom?
Just for the public, if you just Google Susan Cork, Vermont, you'll find it. She's been out there in the public. She's written a book. As Alyssa said, she's had a ton of interviews. So you get a pretty good flavor for some of the issues she stands for in advance of the meeting by doing that.
Other questions or comments, Chris?
Yeah, I don't mean to keep taking up all the oxygen here, but
Come on.
if you look at what happened there, the Stowe Street Bridge conversation, there wasn't a great deal of people there. And then the Stanley Wasson Hall issue was at the same night. It wasn't, I think there may have been even less there because after the bridge conversation, half of them left. So what does it take to bring people to town meeting? Hybrid, the only way to be informed about your budget and what you're voting on at town meeting is right here, or at town meeting, which is the 11th and a half hour to have some informed knowledge about what you're voting on. You kind of hit the nail on the head. Maybe you need to put on the warrant something that just plain pisses people off to show up. That's where you get them there, right? Like the Armory. I mean, that brought out a pretty good drove of people that came to the fire station. So I am dead against Australian ballot just because of what I've seen it do to our school budgets, right? And like I said, when you go up to vote on the school budget, what do you know about that number other than how mad you are about or satisfied you are with the number that you're looking at? Anything else beside that, I don't think probably most people don't know nothing about it. At least at town meeting, conversation ensues and some knowledge is gained by at least what your tax dollars are going for. So I hate to see that ever end. Maybe after I'm gone, I don't give a damn, but. And I think a lot of other people feel the same way. So I don't know how to get these other people engaged and get them to show up. Outside of making it a holiday, and even then, I don't know if they'd show up.
Thanks. All right, I think we're at Yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Bill Shepard. I just would reiterate a little bit of what Chris said. I think we had a great town meeting this year. I think the have your say days beforehand, I think I have mixed feelings about it. I think that Tom and the select board put in a whole lot of work. You met every week in December, you met every week in January. We had a good discussion at those meetings, but there was not a lot of people at either one of them. And most of the people that were at them are the people that come here on a fairly regular basis. I mean, there were a few more people. And I'm not sure that's worthwhile for the select board. It's a tough time of year. It's a lot of work. I know Ian, it kind of overwhelmed him, and I think he didn't run again, partly because of all of that December and January work. but we had a good discussion at town meeting. I would just point out to you, if you want to bring in the clerk from Middlesex, been doing this for over 40 years myself, and people come out in high numbers when there's a significant thing to do. And the select board this past year made some decisions before town meeting that I think would have been things that people would have maybe come out for at town meeting in terms of some of the appropriations that you made on your own in December. I think putting more of those things on the warning will bring people out. And I just remind you, I don't know how many of you read the Times-Argus or pay attention to what goes on in other communities, but the city of Barry changed their charter after the floods in 23 and 24. They moved their town meeting to May, their city meeting to May, in order to, it gives them a little bit more time. And Barry Town has had a Maytown meeting for a long time because they feel that since their budget starts on July 1st, that they have a lot more information about the current year in May than they do in March. And neither of those communities had more than 15% of their grand list turnout for Australian ballot voting. And I don't know what Waterbury's grand list is, checklist is, but if it's 4,000 people, 15% is 600 people. And I'm not sure 600 people voting by Australian ballot who don't come to meetings here, who don't get a chance to listen to what we talk about at town meeting, will give us any better results than having 150 or 200 people at the meeting listening to the discussion. So I think Australian ballot is not a good way to go. For a lot of years, I went to every Harwood or U45 when we were still U45, Duxbury and Waterbury, Full Cross Brook and Brookside or Thatcher Brook, whatever it was. And oftentimes I was the only person in the room other than the school board members. So I think that Australian ballot is not a great thing. So thanks.
If I may, just a question for Bill.
Yeah.
Do you feel any differently about Australian ballot if it's about the budget or about public questions? Or do you think the same rule applies, that you think town meeting day is better for?
No, I think it's better to have discussions. I know it's frustrating. I think that it's helpful to be able to have a discussion and maybe have a motion to amend the budget. I did that this year and added some money to the budget for crew a number of years ago. The select board, after Tropical Storm Irene, we had hired a recreation director. It was a part-time position. There were people in the community who wanted a full-time recreation director's position. The select board said no. We put a budget out that said we're going to have a part-time recreation director and he's going to share time with working for the cemetery. And we had a town meeting and the voters said, we want a full-time recreation director. And the voters got what they wanted to get. And so no, I like town meeting. I think that you have discussions about things that are important to people, and the people who are there and hear all the information get to decide. And if you just have a budget and it goes down, I'm not sure how much you know why it went down. You just know that it went down. Do they want it higher? Or do they want it lower? So anyway, but thanks.
Awesome. Lisa? And Susan is the moderator in Middlesex, since I've already done a poor job summarizing her work
So
tonight.
Susan Clark, that you're talking about, well, let me just ask this. Roger has brought this up a couple of times. So Roger, you just said you want to make sure we can find out how to get more people engaged in our town meeting day. Is that what you're ultimately trying to accomplish, or is there anything else that you're trying to accomplish?
No, it's major issue, yeah.
Okay, so it's not about trying to go to Australian ballot?
No, that was just the mechanism, because we were looking specifically at the model that Duxbury adopted, and,
Which was to move to Australian ballot, right?
Well, it was, but there were several other elements which were included. The Have Your Say Day, which was essentially moving the town meeting discussion to earlier in the process so that you could adjust the budget before it came to an up or down vote.
Right. And like I said, I think the Have Say Day was really nice in that way, but I don't want that to replace what we're currently doing. And I do believe we have a hybrid system. So I just want to be clear on why we're continuing to talk about this and make sure that we're not continuing to push for something other than what the people clearly voted for. So as long as we're all clear on that, that's great. I just want to make sure that we're not heading in some other direction. Yes?
If I may, just based on my knowledge of Susan Clark and what I've heard of her from interviews, I think she's a huge advocate for town meeting.
Great.
I think that's,
I always
she's
feel
just
that,
about
yeah.
trying to maximize
Great.
participation.
Perfect. And I think that they made some good points about you piss people off, they're going to come out to a meeting. And so many people are not involved, obviously, and they should be. So I think that looking at ways to try and get more people to come is great, but I do hope we respect the vote of the people this last go round.
Free pie.
Yeah, anytime.
I was just going to say we should always be striving to strengthen our democracy, and we tried one way, it didn't necessarily work, but it shouldn't stop us from trying every other way.
All right, I will continue us on to the highly exciting traffic ordinance.
I've been waiting all night for this one.
The government name, since we are the government of the town of Waterbury ordinance regulating motor vehicles and traffic. I should just say, I will reach out to Susan to see if she can present about town meeting to all of us and the public, and let folks know. My understanding is we were going to provide a copy of this to someone, and we had not signed it, so this is here today to just re-adopt the thing that is already on the books.
Not even re-adopt, but
Go ahead.
just have it on your, the council's advice was you do not need to re-adopt the ordinance, but the last time the ordinance was adopted, Ian Shea was on the select board, so we're just affirming the ordinance. I will likely come back to in a few months with some suggested updates, but we're just affirming the ordinance because we were unable to locate a signed copy, I'm embarrassed to say, but
So we need to sign it.
Yeah,
That's it.
well, we can sign. Should we have a motion to affirm the town of Waterbury ordinance?
I move to affirm the Town of Waterbury ordinance regulating motor vehicles and traffic.
Second.
Motion by Kane, second by Mike. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? So we've reaffirmed it. Tom noted he may have feedback. I know Tori had some feedback. There are things like 51 South Main Street parking and other things that are known things we need to update,
And
but
we still
for
have the Wesley
tonight.
Church lot dangling in the breeze a little bit. Let's get this softened on signing that agreement of late. So I'm hoping we can have that as a positive update.
Great. So pending future updates, this can be rewarned on our agenda if edits are needed. Anything else on this item?
I don't know.
All right, that brings us to Select Board and Manager informational updates. Tori left me an annotated copy of her agenda with her updates, which says they are planning for, there's a memorial tree planting for Steve Lott's speech. It's Saturday, May 24th at 1 p.m. in the garden next to the library parking lot. That's a tree board update. And they wanted to keep planting. So that's Tori's update for the board. Anyone else have updates?
Yeah, me.
Go ahead.
Finished I sent everyone an email. Finished the looking into local policing. I know we had the conversation with the state police, which kind of makes the point a little moot, but finished it and sent you all a copy of how viciously unaffordable that would be.
Roger, any board updates?
I don't have any this week.
And
There hasn't been DRB meeting for quite some time, so no updates there. Conservation Commission had a fairly lively meeting. There was some conversation about the wildlife corridor. There was some, they are concerned with what their input in the town plan is, because I guess the money that they requested was zeroed out, so there was concern with that. That's the long and the short of it.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And just to say, I mean, right, for public awareness, there was $50,000 in the budget approved by voters at town meeting day for Planning and Conservation Commission.
Right.
The budget also assumed that we would receive a $30,000 municipal planning grant. As we updated the last meeting, we did not receive that municipal planning grant, so we're prioritizing the funding to the Planning Commission for the municipal plan update because that has a set deadline and has to be completed by law. So just to name, that's why that shuffling of funds is
Thank you for
happening.
your clarification.
For public awareness. I attended the last Housing Task Force meeting. Martha will be here at our next meeting. We did a debrief of the entire educational series. Those materials are all on the town website, and there's a lot of good resources on permitting, funding, and some of our panelists are in the room. So that is all up there and posted. We talked about doing some updated materials because at the time the first workshop was done, the online permitting software wasn't live yet. So now that it's live, having some just informational videos to be a helpful resource for folks trying to do accessory dwelling units or other building in town. We also reviewed the 2 proposals that we will look at next week around proposed uses for the Housing Trust Fund and the specific Waterbury Housing Improvement Program proposal. So again, Joe will plan to be at our next meeting with more info about both of those. That's all I had. Tom, any updates?
They mentioned the flood grants earlier. Couple things. I did sign the grant contract for the downtown improvement grant, the $200,000 we were awarded, so we're essentially ready to go on that. We may be able to do some of that work this summer, but I think the bulk of it is planned for the fall. But I mentioned the summer because our paving has been moved up, which usually is, you get a contract, your contractor tells you, yeah, we're good to go for June 15th, and it's done around September 30th. But our paving is moved up. There's, I think, a dearth of state work compared to prior years. So maybe there's some chance we can get to that this year, but we'll push and see if we can. I'm not saying it's possible, but I want to make the effort. It won't be cheaper next year. Second piece, grant related, is Better Connections Grant, which is the $105,000, roughly $75,000 for community planning and in and around the designated village center in Waterbury, and then $30,000 for some stormwater work. I've been working with Duncan McDougall and Katie Gallagher on that grant. They wrote it. We've been working with the state since it's been awarded on drafting an RFP. The state has suggested a steering committee of roughly 10 people. Duncan and Katie, in working on writing the grant, had a community meeting in Waterbury Center that was fairly well attended, and they had a number of folks they met with, business owners, individuals, nonprofits, to get letters of support for the grant. So I know they've got a really good handle on who they would like to see on the steering committee. Question for the board is, what's your pleasure with regards to the committee? We can certainly easily publicly advertise that. We'd like to do that anyway. And I'd assume that the board would want to appoint the committee, but I wanted to check in to see if you also thought that perhaps, since those 2 individuals did so much of the upfront work, would you be comfortable not appointing a steering committee? It's obviously your pleasure.
I'm comfortable with both Duncan and Katie, especially I think it's really critical in that when they have all that upfront knowledge, I think that is really helpful, and they're very capable people, and I think they will aid our municipality.
I'm here to support it. So in general, I will name the most recent example I can think of was the parks planning study.
And that was appointed by the Selectboard, I believe.
It was, and I will name that had different defined constituencies. I don't know if that was in this grant application, but it was more along the lines of like I think I was the select board rep, there was a rec committee rep. I'm not hearing that we need that level of specificity, but in
The state-
general, I think advertising is a best practice and we can help them finalize it. And I support those folks joining if they've been heavily involved.
Okay, so we'll just have that on your next meeting in June.
Other comments or perspectives from the board?
I thank them for all the hard work that they've been doing,
Great.
especially because it's, my neighborhood.
Great. I'm sorry, I'm seeing a hand from Amy. Amy, go ahead.
Norris. Hey, I was wondering, could the Conservation Commission get looped in or review the progress? If someone could send me that information, I think it might be helpful to have a member from the team participate, but not really sure about the scope. So just want to make sure I understand what you're referring to specifically.
Okay.
Yep, we can certainly share that. Other questions or comments? Other updates, Tom?
Yes, just to note, I had a meeting with, just to finish out the police conversation, I did have a meeting with Sheriff Pullen, one of his deputies who actually used to be an officer for the Waterbury Police Force some years ago.
Is this Washington County?
Washington County Sheriff. Not only was one of his top lieutenants in the Waterbury PD years ago, but Sheriff Pullen's mother was in fact town clerk here some time ago. So has some good local ties to Waterbury. The sheriff is available in relatively short term if the town wanted to augment shifts. Also available potentially on a fee-for-service basis. I know we didn't budget for that, but I just wanted to let it be known that he does have some limited availability. If there was a desire to work with the sheriff more closely, something more regular hours, it's something that he would have to work towards, given his current staffing. Like everyone else, he's got challenges there, so if we wanted something like an FTE, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a number of months before that could actually occur. To put the state police contract in a little bit of context, it works out to about $115 an hour for a trooper in a vehicle. The sheriff's rate is quite a bit lower, but he also charges mileage, and he charges above the IRS rate because, as I know, that when you buy a police vehicle, you've got another $30K or so into equipping it for all the electronics. So I think if you could flip a switch and go to the county sheriff entirely instead of state police, there's probably some savings, but you're not cutting your budget in half. But I just want to let people know I had that initial meeting. I thought it was a positive meeting. He does have some capabilities. The interesting thing about the county sheriff is that what he said his model for Waterbury would not be formal officers, but would be more of an FTE model. So you would have a commitment of hours, but not necessarily a commitment of shifts, which could be useful if you're talking about something like traffic enforcement and speeding. Not knowing quite when and where they're going to be out is a possible benefit. So that's just want to fill people in on the conversation.
Any other updates? We can consider if maybe that's a next meeting agenda item to go more in depth. Mike?
I guess Tom hopefully could answer my confusion. The bridge, I get more questions about this. When is the street closing? What date?
So the street is closing June 16th, and that date was picked because that was the end of school.
Right.
School's now been extended a couple days due to snow days, although as I've learned from my wife who's a teacher, sometimes the district can lobby to have a little bit of forgiveness on snow days. And so maybe school will close the 18th, maybe it'll be the 17th. I don't quite know how that works.
I think they already had forgiveness to get it back.
They may have, yeah.
They're already done.
They're done, so.
Yeah, they're done.
So the bridge will be closed a few days before.
I don't know how many people are asking that. maybe something in order. He could put a big banner in the roundabout or something.
That was it.
Kane,
I would like to add a discussion about that to our next agenda. About
that's what I was just writing down when I got distracted, was an update, seeing as that's our last regular meeting before. And with that, I will transition us smoothly to review next meeting agenda. Items I had below unanticipated were the housing things. Police statistics is something that came up tonight, if we want any updates on that. And we also had a discussion of the sheriff, and then you just said an update for the project, bridge project.
Not me.
You just said an update on the bridge closure, bridge project.
No,
I was talking about police.
Oh, sorry, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Police and, okay. What do we want to call it? Police services?
Sure. I guess I can present my findings then.
Okay. We'll do a broad, because that can cover sheriff
Broad will
statistics
be
and
good.
ESP stats. Excellent. Other items for the agenda?
Anything in the parking lot that we should consider?
We have 3-year budget plan, parade and event permit, paving, sidewalks, capital plan. We had a request around local options tax policy as well. Susan Clark, when we can schedule her.
We've got a staff meeting, I think on Wednesday, about the capital plan. Let's pencil it in for the first meeting in June if there's time.
Okay.
That'll give me a target.
I will also note that June is a 3-Monday month, and we do now have a standing policy. That means we will meet 3 Mondays, so just to name that, we'll have more time to work with.
Yahoo.
All right, that feels very healthy if we're doing both housing, trust funds, policing, and maybe capital plan. Any others?
Sounds good.
I'm putting an update on the bridge project, just given the timing.
Yeah.
Seeing as it's the last meeting. All right, any others? I will do my best on that. And then we had the executive session if needed. Anyone need an executive session? What?
I do not.
All right. And with that, then I can take a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn this regular meeting of the Waterbury Selectboard.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Meeting is adjourned at 8:52 PM. Thank you.